the mother in this story, and before you decide whose side you're on, hear me out. I've got grease in my hair from the shop floor and old-fashioned pride stuck in my throat. I watched a man I love turn calluses into cash flow, turn a single truck into a fleet, turn Sunday dinners into board meetings, and turn two children into rivals. I watched our daughter, Mira, wrap her life around the business's bones, the way ivy clings to brick. I watched our son, Luke, take a match to the same foundation and grin at the smoke. And I watched my husband, Ernesto, to anyone who knew him before he owned more land than he could see from the porch, write his will with a hand that trembled and a jaw that would not. This is how we got here. We started with oil, motor oil, not olive, and almonds. The only thing my father brought from the old country besides a stubborn streak strong enough to argue with thunder. I married into a family that loved engines the way some families love music. They could take them apart, name the pieces, put them back together, and swear they could hear when one breathed wrong. Nesto's garage was a lean-to when we met. He had a borrowed wrench, a notebook full of debts, and a baby smile he brought out when a carburetor cooperated. Customers paid in cash or cartons of eggs. I kept a ledger on the kitchen table, moving salt shakers and invoices around like puzzle pieces until red turned to black. We slept light, worked heavy, and learned which bills made the loudest threats. When our daughter, Mira, was born, Nesto tucked her into a bassinet behind the parts counter so he could hum to her while he rebuilt alternators. 2 years later, Luke arrived screaming like he'd already taken offense at the world. We were a family that smelled like gasoline and rosemary, like brake fluid and frying garlic, like late nights and one more try. We cracked the shell of small time. We bought 2 tow trucks and a warehouse unit with a cracked concrete floor and a door that never rolled straight. We learned to be people who said, our bookkeeper and our lawyer. People who had diversions and divisions, who talked about inventory and employees like we'd invented the idea. But success is loud. It rattles doors you thought were nailed shut. It makes people speak up who never had the nerve. It makes your children hear different songs in the same applause. Mira was the child you wanted next to you when a gasket blew at midnight. Steady hands, steady eyes, numbers that lived in her bloodstream. She ran payroll while studying for physics exams, hand-wrote holiday cards to suppliers, and could talk to welders and bankers in the very same tone. Respect without surrender. She loved the business like a living thing. She talked to it, listened when it wheezed. She set reminders on her phone to send flowers when an old customer's wife passed away, to order more black coffee for the night crew, to call the municipal inspector before he called us. To her, every screw had a first name. Luke was brilliance without breaks. Give him a problem, and he'd solve it sideways. He had a salesman's grin and a gambler's pulse. He could charm a new account out of a stone, shake hands with a mayor, talk an old man out of a 40-year loyalty to another shop, just by promising, we'll treat you like blood. But he hated the grind, hated inventory counts, hated safety trainings. He wanted to leap every rung and land where the view looked expensive. Mira earned the business by inches. Luke wanted it in one clean leap. I knew this because I raised them, because I bandaged knuckles split on rusted bolts and hearts split on words that shouldn't have been said. The first betrayal. The first time Luke broke our trust, the shop was humming like a hive. We'd just taken a city fleet contract, 27 vehicles that needed regular maintenance and triage. I put on a big pot of pasta for the crew, celebration by carbs, and while stirring the sauce, grabbed the mail from the basket. The envelope had a logo I didn't recognize. When I opened it, a cold went through me that no sweater could fix. A line of credit, not ours, new, large, secured against commercial assets jointly held by Ernesto and Sons Automotive and Logistics. The signature was a scrawl I knew like my own heartbeat. Luke's. When I showed Nesto, he set his jaw and said nothing. He took the truck into town, came back with the credit line canceled, penalties paid, a hush check written. He told me, he's young. I made mistakes at his age, too, but he hadn't signed our home to a stranger. He hadn't eaten recklessness for breakfast and called it ambition. He hadn't looked his mother in the eye and said, "Don't worry," while the ink dried. We didn't tell Mira, not then. I thought we were protecting the peace. I didn't know we were feeding a future explosion. A month later, a supplier sent over pallets we hadn't ordered. Specialty parts. Rare. High margin. They said they'd spoken to our new purchasing director. Who? I asked. The rep read a phone number, and my stomach lurched. Luke had made a deal on the side, double-dipping with a competitor who paid him for undermining our bulk rates. It wasn't just the money. It was the principle. It was the way he walked into the kitchen like nothing had happened, kissed my cheek, asked what was for dinner. When we confronted him, he laughed at first. Then, when Nesto didn't, he got mean. The world's changing. You're still running this like a mom and pop. I'm trying to make us modern. Modern. Is that what you call stealing from your own blood? We froze him out of accounts. We stripped his permissions. We let him keep his office because Nesto couldn't bring himself to box up his son's framed diploma and baseball trophies, the ones Mira hung when Luke forgot. We gave him a narrow lane and hoped he'd learn how to drive straight in it. He didn't. The night it all tilted for good was the 30-year anniversary party. Lights strung across the yard, tables under the maple, employees dragging their kids through the grass and sneaking them extra slices of cake. We hung old photos on a clothesline. Nesto in the lean-to, teenage Mira with grease on her cheek, little Luke asleep in a laundry basket full of shop rags. People told the origin story the way they always did, with extra glory for the hard parts. It was a night for gratitude. Nesto stood to speak. His hair had gone to silver threads, and his hands shook slightly. But when he talked about the business, the old steel returned. He thanked everyone. He used names. He used dates. He made people feel seen, which is why they stayed in the first place. Then he cleared his throat and said, "I've made my decision." And the night held its breath. I started this alone. Your mother made it survive. The two of you? He looked at our children, who, even as adults, sat on either side of me as if this were still church. Made it grow. But a business needs one captain. Mira's hand found mine under the table. Luke's jaw tightened. "I'm leaving the business to Luke," Nesto said, and the words landed like iron dropped on a glass tabletop. "Effective at my retirement. He will be CEO. Mira will remain COO." The air turned to salt. The music tripped and fell off a cliff. I saw faces tilt toward us, as if we were a television, strangers leaning in for a crash. I saw my daughter swallow the hurt, like a woman who'd trained her whole life not to cry at work. I saw my son roll his shoulders back like a prince trying a crown for weight. I saw my husband sit down and refuse to meet my eyes. It wasn't just what he said, it was what he didn't. He didn't say why. He didn't say how. He didn't say, I know he hurt us, and I'm trusting him anyway. Or, I think the business needs a kind of hunger that can't be taught. He said nothing to fill the wound. People clapped because that's what you do when a man in a suit tells you to clap. Inside, I turned to stone. Later, in our room, after we put the dishes away with robotic hands and told the night crew good job and watched our guests reverse down the driveway, I closed the door and said, very softly, explain. He sat on the bed. He looked older than he had all month. I built this with spite, he said, with will, with the kind of burn that keeps you up nights planning 10 moves ahead. Mira is steadiness. Luke is fire. Fire burns what it touches, I said. It also forges steel. You took the match from Mira's trained hands and gave it to the boy who once lit our trash can because sparks looked pretty. He flinched. I did what I thought would keep it alive after I'm gone. You didn't just choose a successor, I said. You chose a son. He didn't disagree. Mira didn't explode. She did something harder. She came to work the next day. She ran the schedule. She called suppliers. She kept the fleets rolling. She answered emails until midnight and turned her hurt into neat stacks and clear subject lines. But something in her dimmed. Not her competence. That stayed a lighthouse. Her presence. The way she used to whistle walking the floor. The way she used to pat the hoods of customer cars like she was blessing them on their way. She stopped putting small notes on my coffee. She stopped staying late just because. She started saving her brilliance for work she could do without handing her soul to Luke. I saw her in the office one night, shoulders hunched, face in her hands, and for the first time, she didn't straighten when I walked in. Say the word, I told her, and we walk. You and me. And where would we go? She asked, voice flat. He gets to keep Dad in the business. He gets to be the son and the king. What do we get, Ma? An Etsy store? A story where we're brave but broke? You get your dignity. I had that, she said. I had it when I thought the work mattered more than the last name. I held my daughter while she cried into my sweater, and I prayed the old prayers a mother prays. Fix this, fix them, fix what I cannot. Luke took to leadership like a man driving with mirrors. He saw himself from every angle and smiled. He moved us into a headquarters with glass walls and plants that needed misting. He hired a brand consultant to choose a new shade of blue for the logo. Trustworthy, but modern. He started saying stakeholders instead of people. He built an app. He put sensors on the lifts and trackers on the trucks. He cut the night shift because the investors he'd courted didn't like the overtime. He flashed plans for a second location like a magician's scarf. And business soared. For a time. The city liked our bland modernity. So did the out-of-town firms with fleet work they didn't trust to old-school shops. Money came fast and said the right things. Luke used our growth to shove his history into a drawer. He treated caution like a lack of imagination. He treated Mira like a piece of legacy furniture he couldn't get rid of without looking like the bad guy. Meanwhile, I watched the people who built us. The mechanics with shoulders ruined by 20 years of lifting. The dispatchers who memorized customer voices. The drivers who called the office when they saw a baby seat left on a curb get pushed to the edges in favor of glossy hires with notebooks full of buzzwords. When layoffs came in the slow season, it wasn't the paper pushers who went first. "You're becoming what your father feared," I told him one night, when we finally trapped him in a corner with a calendar and a conscience. A brand without a backbone. "I'm making us into something people respect," he said. "They respected us when we showed up in the snow with a warm truck and a spare battery." "They respect scale," he said, like he'd tasted the word and found it sweet. "They respect the future." "Then why?" I asked. "Do I miss the past like oxygen?" I should have known he was moving money. Integrity wasn't a language he spoke, but I was busy holding the center. The crew's morale, Mira's heart, Nesto's body as it began to betray him. Cancer doesn't care if you're in the middle of a generational war. It shows up with a clipboard and sits itself at the head of the table. The diagnosis was quiet and brutal. The treatments were loud and useless. Nesto got smaller, and the business got bigger, and I learned to translate machine schedules and marrow schedules at the same time. It was during one of those long clinic days that Mira's phone pinged with an alert. She frowned, then paled. "The line of credit," she whispered. He opened a new one, secured with the second location's property. "He wouldn't," I said, but of course he would. Of course. She typed. She called. She knocked on Luke's door without waiting for an answer. He had the decency to look startled. Delightful. Guilt had finally learned his name. "You couldn't even wait," she said, and her voice didn't rise. It fell, heavy and certain. "While Dad is in a hospital bed, you stole air from the company and called it vision." "It's not stealing," he said. "It's leverage. Against our future. Against our competitors." "You took our building," she said, "and turned it into a poker chip." I looked at my son, my only boy, with his father's eyes and a stranger's mouth, and I asked him, "What happens when a wind big enough hits this pretty house you're building? What happens when a contract dries up or a lawsuit comes through the door with teeth?" "Stop being small," he snapped, and I felt something I had kept in check for 20 years break through my skin. "Small is what fed you," I said. "Small is what kept the lights on while you figured out who you wanted to be. Small is what buried your grandmother and paid for your braces. Small is the backbone of this town. And the day you decided you're above it is the day you stopped being one of us." "I'm trying to make you proud," he said. And the way he said it, like pride could be bought in bulk, hurt more than anything else. "Pride is you staying when the snow comes," I said. "Pride is making payroll first and yourself last. Pride is listening to the woman who saved you more times than she's told you." He didn't want my pride. He wanted my permission to become the kind of man who thinks pride is something printed on glossy paper. He didn't get it. When death pulls up a chair, secrets get mouthy. People make choices hoping time will forgive them if they're wrong. Nesto, weak and willful, called the lawyer to the house. No more party speeches. No more ambiguity. He signed, and with his pen declared that Luke would be CEO, majority owner, steward of our name. He asked me to sit after. He reached for my hand. He had the body of a soldier who's fought too many wars, and the eyes of a boy who's realized too late he chose the wrong hill. I did what I did to force him to grow up, he said. If I took it away, he'd become nothing but resentment. If I gave it to Mira, I'd lose him forever. You might lose her now, I said. I can't lose my son, he whispered. And I can't lose my daughter. So we split, he said, and tried to smile. Half our hearts each. He died in the early morning, when the street was white with frost. Mira held one of his hands, and I held the other. Luke sat in a chair by the window, looking out like he could spot a way to reverse time if he just stared hard enough. The funeral was a storm. The repast was a blur of casseroles and old stories. People told me my husband was a legend and a fool, the way people do when they need to say something that feels like both comfort and gossip. I nodded. I made coffee. I wrote thank you notes with a grief that sat in my lap like a sleeping dog, heavy and kind, unwilling to move. Then I put on a clean black dress and went to work. Luke tried to push Mira out within a month. He didn't call it that. He called it role realignment and optimizing for the future and streamlining decision-making. He invited her to a meeting with the attorney. He slid an NDA across the table like a magician's coin. He said a fancy job would be created at the parent company, one level up, more strategic. It had no direct reports, no budget, no people. It was a window seat to nowhere. Mira read the document. She didn't cry. She didn't break the pen. She looked up and said very carefully, "You're afraid of me." He laughed. It sounded like a cough. "You're afraid people like me more," she continued. "You're afraid the line leads to my door, not yours. You're afraid Dad left you the title and me the trust." "If you don't sign," he said, "we can do this the hard way." She stood. "Every woman in this building knows the hard way. We survived it before you learned to lace your shoes." She walked out. People in the hallway stood straighter as she passed. That's the thing about earned authority. You don't need a plaque to carry it. He tried to fire her. The board, stacked with old hands who'd turned wrenches with Nesto before Luke started shaving, refused. He tried again. They refused again. He pivoted to cutting her budget. She moved mountains without money. He tried freezing her out of meetings. She built another table and filled it with the people who actually ran the work. And business stuttered. Our new markets hadn't learned who to call when the app went blank. Our old ones had learned they couldn't find Luke when the lift stuck at midnight. A city contract went up for rebid, and we lost it to a firm whose owner had once cried at our table over his broken marriage and left with a to-go plate. Loyalty is a delicate machine. Ignore it, and it seizes. "We're fine," Luke told the board. "We're growing." This is a blip. But the numbers bled in ways I could see without glasses. We found the lie because Mira keeps lists like some people pray. She reconciles on Sundays. She feels the cadence of the book like a second heartbeat, a payment posted twice, a vendor name she didn't recognize, a retainer drawn without an invoice attached. She traced the threads and found they led to a consultancy registered in Delaware, with a very pretty website and 3 employees with LinkedIn profiles that read like poetry about leverage and disruption. The owner? A man who'd been Luke's roommate his second year at business school. The consultancy had been advising us for 18 months to the tune of a salary for a small crew. And the advice, when Mira forced it into daylight, looked like a collage of words copied from other companies' decks. We'd paid to be told to be modern by children who thought modern meant expensive plants and saying ecosystem in a sentence. We'd paid. Or Luke had paid, the way people pay when the money isn't really theirs. When she confronted him with the spreadsheet, he didn't deny it. He smiled like she'd solved a test. "You don't understand what it takes," he said. "You think this thing runs on elbow grease and good feelings. You think Dad's ghost will pay the bills." "I think Dad built something you treat like a prop," she said. "You're sentimental. You're reckless. You're ungrateful. You're a liar." That's when I stepped in. "Enough," I said, and I felt the room go still, the way it did 30 years ago when a supplier called to say the shipment was delayed and dinner would be late and we'd eat sandwiches over the ledger instead. "You're both right. And you're both cowards." "Ma!" Luke began. "No," I said. "I am done letting grief be the reason we don't say what's true. Mira, you are punishing your father through his son. Luke, you are punishing your father through his daughter. You both want Nesto to come roaring back from the dead and tell you who you are. He is gone. And we're here. So here's what we're going to do." They stared. "You," I pointed at Luke, "are going to open every single account, contract, and relationship. No more hidden consultancies. No more secret lines of credit. You want to be a leader? Start by telling the truth. And you," I turned to Mira, "are going to stop waiting to be crowned. You want to run this? Run it. Stop asking for permission from a grave." They bristled at my tone. Good. A burn can cauterize. You can lose a business to laziness, to theft, to the slow rot of disrespect. Or you can save it with sunlight. We hired an outside auditor with no interest in our feelings. She came in with a team that wore sensible shoes and carried laptops like shields. She had kind eyes and a laugh that didn't interfere with her scalpel. "Treat me like a detective," she said. "Tell me who had motive, who had opportunity, where the bodies might be." We joked at first. We stopped when the first stack of unauthorized came back with Luke's initials and the word approved. He sat through those meetings like a boxer in the late rounds. He bled ink. He signed reversals where he could. He defended what he had to. He learned there are two kinds of power: the kind that keeps you safe in rooms with closed doors, and the kind that walks with you through a welding bay and makes someone hand you a wrench. Mira ran operations like a clean engine. She cut nothing that mattered. She cut everything that didn't. She froze perks she'd argued for in better years and called each employee herself to explain why. She moved us back to coffee that came in catering packs and pretended not to hear the sighs. She cut the plant budget and the app's splash screen video. She cut the holiday gala and replaced it with bonuses that could pay for a new set of snow tires. I went back to the ledger, not because I had to, because I missed it, because my handwriting is still steadier than any digital font, because in a world where everything had become performance, I needed to touch the thing that had saved us the first time. It came like they always do, announced and ignored until it isn't. A nor'easter, ice on lines, Plows too slow to matter? The app went down and so did half the grid. It was black, then white, then blue with rotating light bars and the sound of diesel clearing throats. Our old customers didn't open an app. They called the number they'd had since the 80s. The one on the magnet stuck to 1,000 refrigerators. The one on the decal of 100 dashboards. It rang, and the night crew picked up, and the night crew said yes, and the night crew went out and our trucks painted the dark with their stubborn beams. Luke showed up in a sweater and loafers. "Isn't there some emergency contractor we can call?" he asked, voice light, like the universe would settle at the right temperature if he negotiated it. I handed him a jacket. He looked surprised, then grateful. "Ride along," I said. He climbed into a plow truck next to Manny, who's been with us longer than either of my children have had adult teeth. Manny told him where to set his feet, how to brace when a drift fought back, how to listen for the pitch of the engine when the weight shifted. He told him where he buried his brother. He told him where the road lies to you because it looks like it keeps going but doesn't. Luke nodded. He salted. He waved at people who flashed their brights in thanks. Mira rode dispatch with 2 phones and a radio, and the kind of calm that makes men in chaos weep with gratitude. She called out coffee runs. She kept a list of crews who'd blown through their arrest and pretended not to notice when they skipped it. She sent the smaller trucks to the nursing home first, then the bakery, then the hospital employees' lot. She triaged, prioritized, and apologized without shame. She remembered to call Mrs. Patel on 8th because Mrs. Patel doesn't drive but needs someone to check her boiler when the ice goes hard. I brewed coffee in an army pot so old it whistled like a kettle. I made sandwiches in the break room with whatever we had. I handed them out like medicine. When the sun finally admitted defeat and came back around, our town was cut with paths we had made. The city manager called to say thank you, and I could hear the scratch of a pen as he wrote down a new list of who to call first the next time. I found my son asleep on a creeper under lift 3, jacket thrown over his face, boots still on. I wanted to shake him and ask, "Do you understand now?" But I let him sleep. Understanding blooms best in quiet. A week after the storm, after we'd slept like people who'd forgotten how, after the app consultant stopped by with a diagram of what we could do if we ever wanted to handle scale properly, after the auditor sent the initial report with a cover letter that said, in so many gentle words, "Fix this or lose it," I found a letter on my desk. It was handwritten on Nesto's lined yellow pad, the one he kept next to the phone for messages. His handwriting was a mess in the last year. This wasn't that. This was old ink. "If I'm gone and you find this when the house is quiet, I disappointed you. I know it. I'm sorry." I loved the boy more loudly because I knew he needed to hear it to believe. I loved the girl more quietly because I knew she could hear it even when I didn't say a thing. Both ways were wrong. Both ways were lazy. The business is not a trophy. It's a service. Whoever remembers that should run it. If the paper says otherwise, burn the paper. Your stubborn old husband, E. I called Mira and Luke into the office and read it to them. Luke cried first. It came out of him like a gulp. Mira stood very still the way she does when a car's on the lift and the bolts don't want to break, and she's deciding whether to use heat. "Burn the paper," I said, and placed the letter on the desk between them. "You can't," Luke whispered. "The will..." The will can be changed by the board, I said. It was a private corporation before you tried to make it a brand. We can vote to separate the roles. We can vote to pull the emergency brake and set it again. He looked at me like I'd offered him a life jacket and a confession. I'm not good at this part, he said. The parts that don't fit in a deck. The parts where men look at me and wait for me to know what always kept this from rusting. You're good at getting doors to open, I said. You're good at making people believe in tomorrow. You're terrible at keeping promises to Monday mornings. He laughed through tears. That's fair. We took it to the board. They listened. They made old sounds, and ah, and the cluck. That means a man is thinking about being brave. Then they did a thing called the right thing. They voted to restructure. Luke remained majority owner. Mira was named CEO. Luke became head of growth and partnerships, a role that leveraged every shining sharp thing about him while surgically removing his hand from the tiller. The consultancy was let go, with a note that said, "Thank you, because we were raised right." The Delaware shell was closed. The emergency line of credit was renegotiated with a payment plan that meant belt-tightening, but not bone-breaking. The second location was mothballed with grace. When we walked out, the crew clapped, not because they had read any of the documents, because they could smell when a place was going to survive. Don't mistake this for a fairy tale. Luke had to eat a plate of cold, bitter humility. Sometimes he pushed back from the table and sulked in the garage until even the rat under the compressor felt uncomfortable. Sometimes he booked meetings we had to cancel. Sometimes he promised things we couldn't deliver. Mira learned the art of telling him no in a way that felt like yes. He learned the art of listening, which is harder than any negotiation. And when the city manager called about the next storm, he didn't hesitate. He didn't parse brand impact. He said, "We'll be there." And then he was. Mira changed things slowly, then fast. She brought back apprenticeships with a scholarship fund in Dad's name. She built a pathway for women to move from reception to wrench without having to ask for permission. She set contracts at rates that reflected not just market forces, but human endurance. She did the math and found a way to convert night crew overtime into comp time. That meant people could go to their kids' softball games and still pay for new cleats. She called the app guy and said, "We'll keep the map, lose the splash screen, and stop alerting customers to things that make our crew's lives harder." He blinked. He adjusted. I retired and didn't. I stopped taking a salary. I kept a key. I brought lasagna on Fridays and tapped the ledger with one finger when the totals didn't smell right. The young ones called me Miss D. The older ones called me Mama. I let both with equal joy. At home, grief didn't go away. It sat at the end of the dining table like a friend who doesn't talk much, but reminds you you're not alone. I set a plate for it on holidays. I put out the cheap wine Nesto loved even after we could afford the fancy kind. I tell it stories about the night he fell asleep under lift 3 with a wrench mark on his cheek. Sometimes, late, I take out the letter and read it again. It doesn't fade. Paper that carries the truth doesn't. You want a moral? Fine. Here's mine. A business is a promise you make to a place. It is not a casino. It is not a canvas for insecure men to paint themselves gold. It is not an inheritance to hoard or a stage to flex on. It is work. It is showing up at midnight. It is washing your hands and remembering the names of the people whose hands you shake. It is knowing when to hand the keys to the steady hands that kept it breathing. My husband chose wrong in public and right in private, and I wish he'd lived long enough to say the right out loud. My son tried to make us into a pitch deck and learned to be a man in a plow truck at 3 in the morning. My daughter proved that leadership doesn't need a microphone, it needs a spine. I am the mother who watched a man I loved build something, and a man I love almost destroy it. And I am the mother who watched our daughter stand up and say, "Not on my watch." The shop is loud again, the old kind of loud. Not the buzz of branding, but the music of impact wrenches and laughter, and Manny telling the new kid where the road lies to you. We kept the plants, 2 of them, in memory of a season when we forgot that green grows, where you water people, not ficuses. Sometimes Luke stands in the doorway of Mira's office, and they argue in whispers that turn to plans. Sometimes he brings coffee and says thank you with his eyes, because words still catch on his pride. Sometimes I walk the floor by myself and trail my fingers along the edges of the workbenches and say a prayer that sounds like a to-do list. We didn't burn the paper, we rewrote it. And when the snow on the highway goes hard and the night goes long, our trucks still paint the dark with their stubborn beams. The phone still rings. We still pick up because that's the business. Because that's the family. Tired of chaos at home? Unlock simple, practical parenting tips to create a calm and loving vibe. Since 2010, Parenting Simply has been your community for connecting with your kids and mastering easy skills to transform your home. Our mission: slash stress for parents and kids with powerful communication and organizational hacks. Say goodbye to doom and gloom. Parenting can be fun, joyful, and fulfilling. You've got what it takes to be an amazing, loving parent, and we'll show you how. Click the link below for stress-free parenting tools and join our community. Dive into stories that stir your soul. Jackie Smith. Stories is your daily haven for raw emotions, courageous women, and authentic, true life narratives. We weave tales of hope, strength, dreams, and the quiet miracles of everyday life. Subscribe now to experience a fresh, heartfelt chapter every day that sparks wonder and connection. Join our community and be part of the journey.